If you don't play piano yourself, the idea of writing a piano part can be super daunting. There are so many notes. They play with two hands at once. Where do you even begin? In this video, I'm going to break down how you can write your own piano parts, even if you don't play piano. Hi friends, and welcome back to Finishing the Score. My name is Julie, and I'm a musical theater composer and orchestrator. I make videos about composing, music software, and I share progress and behind-the-scenes videos about my current projects. If that sounds like something you're interested in, go ahead and hit subscribe. As a musical theater composer, the skill of writing piano accompaniments is super important because before you get to the point where you've got an orchestrated song, typically things are just performed with a piano and a vocal. My background in music comes from playing the violin and conducting and music directing. So when I was getting started with writing piano parts, I found it super intimidating. In this video, I'm going to share with you the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way to help you write better piano parts too. We're going to start with selecting chords, talk about how to write a bass line, optionally doubling the melody if you so choose, and then the different ways you can vary the texture of your piano part to create interest and evoke different genres. Let's get into it. All right, in our example that we're going to be using throughout the video, I've got an 8-bar vocal melody here, and we're going to write a piano accompaniment to go with it. Let's take a listen to what the melody sounds like. If you're just seeing this piano staff notation for the first time, I want to orient you quickly. Piano parts are written on a grand staff, so you've got a top staff here with a treble clef and a bottom staff here with a bass clef. Generally speaking, the top staff is for the notes played by the right hand, and those are higher pitch notes on the piano, and the lower staff is generally played by the left hand with the lower pitches. The first thing you'll want to do is to pick some chords to go along with this melody. So let's do a quick deep dive into some diatonic harmony so that we can get started. Diatonic simply means within the key. So let's say we're in the key of G major. A chord is built in thirds, like this. So starting on the first note of our scale, we get G, B, D. To make a G major chord. Continuing this pattern, we get A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished, and back to G major. These chords are a great place to start when composing because they will pretty much all sound good within the key of G major. So when you're trying to pick chords to go with your melody, I would recommend that you try playing them on the piano while you sing along and see how they feel over the melody. Does it create the correct emotion or feeling that you're going for at that point in the melody? If you don't have a MIDI keyboard or an actual keyboard or piano to sit down with, you can always put these into your notation program or your digital audio workstation. Hear them, listen to them, and hear how they sound, and play them over your melody. So I picked out some chords to go with this melody, so let's take a listen to how that sounds with the chords. Now that we've picked out our piano chords, it's time to start putting the chords into our piano part. So the simplest way to start here is to enter the chords in what's called closed position. This essentially means that all of the notes are as close together as possible. Open position means that you're spreading the chord tones over a wider pitch range. Here's an example of how two different G chords sound in different closed or open positions. You can always experiment with how the notes are placed in the piano part to get different effects. The other choice I'm going to make here for simplicity is to use the chords in root position. Root position essentially means that if it's a G major chord, the root note, the G, is at the bottom. It's the lowest note that we hear in the chord. If we moved that G up so that the lowest note was the next note in the chord, the B, then that would be what's called first inversion. And if we continued that pattern so that the D was the lowest note in the chord, that would be called second inversion. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like to invert the chords. I want to make an important distinction here that it is about the lowest note in the chord. So if you had a moving bass note and the chord in the right hand of the piano was staying the same, that is still considered inverting the chord. So let's take a listen to this example where that is the case. All right, now that we understand that about chords, I have applied root position, closed position chords to the right hand part of the piano line here. You could also put the chords in the left hand, but there's some limits to how low you can go in terms of these chords, and I'll talk about that shortly. A good rule of thumb is to not use any third intervals below C2. So that's the C below middle C. So there's that C major chord at that C2. If we start to move down, you can hear how that starts to sound kind of muddy. Below those notes, you can still use those notes, but I would recommend you switch over to using a fifth here, and you can add the thirds up high if you so choose. All right, next we're going to add a bass line. For simplicity, I'm starting with this example by taking the root note of every chord and putting it in the left hand. Let's hear what that sounds like. Adding the bass note in the left hand there gives those right hand chords a little bit more power and punch. We don't have to use root position chords though. There are two primary reasons why you might want to use chord inversion, so changing the note in the bass. One is to make the chord feel less stable. This might support the emotion that you're going for in the lyric better. The second reason is that you may want to use inversions to help smooth out the bass line. If you noticed from our last example, the notes jumped around a lot in order to get from chord to chord, and that wasn't the most smooth sounding line. Now, by using inversions, you can get the notes to have more of a stepwise motion instead of jumping from chord to chord. Now for this example, I used chord inversions to help the bass line sound smoother. I want to keep my final chord as a root position chord so that that one feels most stable. It feels like a home when we arrive there. But for many of these other ones, I've selected inversions. Take a listen to this and see if you feel a difference in the chord stability. Also, listen to that bass line and see if you can hear the more stepwise movement instead of it jumping around. Now that we've got chords and a bass line, the third element to consider is melody. So with a piano accompaniment that goes along with a vocal track, you don't always need the melody in the piano. There are two primary reasons why you might want to include it though. The melody in the piano can help the singer follow along with the music. This is especially useful if you're working with young singers who are new to singing, or you may choose to add the melody into the piano part to create some emphasis of the melody. This happens a lot in a chorus or a bridge, something that's very strong and emotional. It's very common to double the melody in the piano. In this example, I'm doubling the melody. I still want to have the chords in the right hand of the piano, but I'm also having the melody in the right hand of the piano. In order to still get the chords along with the melody, what I'm doing is on the longest notes of the melody, I'm putting the chord notes below the melody note. You still want the melody note to sound on the top of the chord so that it comes through as the melody line, but you can put the chord tones below it. Now remember, The pianist only has two hands. They can't play a bass line, chords, and a melody with a third hand, so that's why it's important to put the chord notes in closed position right underneath that melody note so that the pianist can get to them. Let's take a listen and hear how this sounds. Hey friends, I'm back on a new day and we are going to be getting back into it with texture for piano parts. So far we've been looking at a very simple texture, but there's a whole world of possibilities out there with the kinds of things that you can create that can evoke genre and mood. So far we've been looking at single block chords, one chord per measure. We can also look at block chords that have a faster rhythm in the bar. We could also talk about arpeggios, where you're splitting the notes out over time. Let's start by talking about block chords with a faster rhythm. Here's an example that's very reminiscent of a singer-songwriter feel, where you've got kind of block chords in the right hand over a bass note that's held over the bar. Notice how I added some interest in the second half of the melody by creating more movement in the bass. We've got some collaboration here from the piano cat. Hi, piano cat. As opposed to block chords, here's an example that uses arpeggios to create a different kind of a texture. This is a much more classical sound. And there's a whole world of possibilities with how you can combine the block chords and arpeggios to create different textures. Here's an example which uses some block chords and some moving arpeggio notes to create a more full texture. Let's take a listen to how that sounds. One way to control the energy in your texture is to control the rhythms that you're using. So the smallest rhythmic unit of your bar is going to define how energetic a particular bar feels. So in this particular example, I've got the smallest rhythm changing from half notes in the first bar all the way up to 16th notes by the end. Take a listen through and feel how the energy increases as we listen. Another great technique for your piano parts is to allow the piano to complement the vocal line by being relatively static while the vocal is moving, and then having the piano do more interesting things while the vocal is not moving. Here's how that might sound. Another great way to increase or decrease the energy is with how many notes in the chord that you use. So at a very minimum, you need the root note of a chord and its third to define the quality, because if you have a major or minor chord, you're going to have a major or minor third. You don't really need the fifth. It's sort of an extra note that helps fill out the chord. So in this example, I'm starting with a 2-note chord, moving all the way up to having, it's still the same 3 notes in the chord, but I'm doubling a number of them. So we end up with 7 total notes in the texture by the end. Take a listen to how that sounds. You see how that feels like it's really expanding? And one final technique I want to leave you with is thinking about the pitch register you choose to set your notes in. Putting notes in a very high register can sound thin, tentative, unsure, whereas a strong, low bass note can make something feel grounded and secure. Take a listen to this example where I'm changing the pitch register of the notes. In addition to where I'm placing the notes, think also about how wide the pitch register is. Now what? I just threw a boatload of information at you, so what next? What do you do now? I highly recommend that you get your hands on as much piano music as you can. Study it. Now that you know these techniques, you can see when the composer is choosing to make changes in pitch register, in rhythm, in how frequently they change the chords or what chords they use. Consider this the beginning of your own personal treasure hunt as you go look for tools that really speak to you in the piano music that you look at, and you can always incorporate those tools into your own work. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video and you want to learn more about how instrumental parts can be used to support your music, you may be interested in this video where I share some techniques about highlighting the hook for your listener. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. Happy composing, and I'll see you next time. Bye! Finishing.